Hey, everybody. Keith Niebuhr with Gators Online and On3 to talk a little Florida Gators football this morning with On3 national columnist Jesse Simonton. And Jesse, you had some strong takes following that game the other night. Florida's 24-11 loss at number 14 Utah. It wasn't pretty. I mean, everybody that watched the game came to that conclusion, but you had some conclusions within that conclusion. And it was kind of biting. You weren't taking shots at Florida, Jesse, on Twitter, but you were kind of spelling out what a lot of people I think were thinking, but doing it in your own creative way. So, what were your biggest takeaways from that game?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. I think from a micro sense, I think there actually are some positives, especially when you kind of go back and rewatch some of that tape. I think, some of the adjustments that Austin Armstrong and the defense made in the second half, the fact you were able to kind of, limit what Utah was able to do. It wasn't like you were getting, blown off the ball on both sides. There were some extremely concerning, I think, red flags offensively, and we can get into that. And I think some of the coaching mistakes, whether it was the special teams, some of the the decisions on personnel, who was getting touches. I think we both agree it can be very nitpicky in terms of play calling. One could work, one may bust, but just the sheer lack of they just kind of threw their hands up and said, we're not going to run the ball at all. Well, then you take the ball out of two of your better playmakers' hands, and Etienne and Johnson, and that just limits what this Florida team is capable of on the field right now. From a macro perspective, I think that game just kind of illuminates some of the concerns that many have expressed kind of in and around the program of where this thing is going. And it's not. I am someone that I've sat down with Billy. I like Billy Napier a lot. I believe Billy Napier has a proof of concept. He's shown what how he wants to rebuild Florida, how he did it at Louisiana Lafayette, and his plan to do the same thing in Gainesville. The problem is, and what he's bumping up against, and I think, continues to kind of year one, there was some, concerns or flags maybe shown. And now, year two shouldn't have looked like week two, in your debut at Florida. Now you're seeing, is this proof of concept? I get it, but is it actually capable of happening here now when you want to lay out a 4-5 year plan? That's not what Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado. That's what Florida fans see. That's not what Lincoln Riley did at USC, Sonny Dykes at TCU, Kalen Niebuhr at Washington. And so while others are microwaving this thing elsewhere, he's, continuing to say, hey, let's be patient. We're waiting on this really nice 24 class. That it's just a hard sell right now, in the present day of college football.
Yeah, it is. There's no question about it. Jesse, the penalties really were one of the things that struck me and struck a lot of the Gator fans out there. Florida State, though, played last night and had a lot of penalties. But they can overcome those things because they've got a quarterback that can get the ball up and down the field. They've got dynamic playmakers at the receiver position. This high-octane type of offense. Florida really can't overcome those kinds of mistakes. They don't have the chunk play offense. And you mentioned that a lot of the dink and dunk in one of your tweets. But for Florida, it seems like penalties like that, not just given what happened, but when they happened, the situationals of, I guess, 4 of them were on third down, and Florida finished 1 of 13 on third downs. But, Jesse, they don't look like they're a team built to overcome mistakes like that.
No, they're not. And, they had 2 crippling penalties on those third and shorts that took away opportunities, potentially scoring opportunities. Obviously, a lot has been made of the special teams gaffe where 2 number 3s are on the field. And, that's inexcusable. And that's something that a Florida fan joke, texted me that said, we'll be the only team in the country that this happens to this season. I don't know if that'll be true. But to your point, Florida State last night, Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, those guys, they're able to overcome, some of those self-inflicted mistakes. Whereas Florida right now, just personnel and schematically wise, is not. There was some pushback from folks to me on Twitter from Florida fans when I posted, Graham Mertz's passing chart from PFF, and it was a lot of dink and dunk. And there was, some folks took umbrage with me saying that Billy Napier didn't trust him or didn't let him rip it. There's a difference between, a 7-step drop or a 60-yard pass. That's not what I'm speaking about there. You can kind of manipulate the pocket and still play the quick game and create explosive plays. I mean, again, that's what Colorado did. They got the ball out extremely fast against TCU. They didn't let Shedeur Sanders get hurt, and the guy threw for 510 yards. You can still create chunk plays by putting your playmakers in space and trusting your quarterback to be kind of that point guard precision passer. And that's just not Graham Mertz's game. And, that's what Florida's dealing with right now. And so they have a very small margin for error. And so when you make those mistakes like the penalties, or you struggle in pass protection, or you give up 5 sacks, suddenly when you're behind the chains, it becomes very difficult to consistently move the football.
All right, here's something that I haven't seen too many people talk about. You watched Florida play last year. You've now seen one game this year. From what you've seen, is there any talent there? Is there talent there to have a winning record in year 2? Is it there?
I don't, winning record now, I think, is going to be tough. I think if Florida can push 6-6 with this schedule, probably pretty good. Probably fair expectations there. Get to a bowl game. Maybe you can find, a winning season with that, week 13, game 13. I do think there is some talent on the roster. Again, I thought you can be optimistic or be even encouraged with some of the signs they showed defensively. There's young players on that side of the ball that really flashed, and obviously a lot of folks are excited about Wilson at wide receiver. ETN is, was kind of a non-factor in this game, but he's going to be one of Florida's best players all season. So there is some talent. Is it equitable to kind of, some of the teams that Florida is going to be facing in the SEC on a weekly basis? That remains to be seen. LSU look, as many mistakes as they made, they have a ton of dudes. We know what Georgia brings to the table. Obviously, Florida and Tennessee in week 3 is I really think, to me, Keith, that's going to be kind of the game that really defines where this season goes for Florida. Both, again, from a big picture perspective and just kind of how the rest of 2023 may play out.
When you look at it in hindsight, we probably all should have maybe seen this coming, even though Utah was missing a handful of starters and key players at that. It was a veteran team. It was playing at home, and it was week 1 in Florida with, 17 or 18 newcomers in the 2 deep, playing its first game, playing on the road. It really was a recipe for ugliness, although it was a lot uglier than I think people thought. But Jesse, speaking to the offensive line, one starter, Kingsley Aguak in the center, was out. You just lost a starter a few weeks ago who left the program due to an illness in the family. And you lost 3 starters from a very good offensive line last year. But they really struggled the other night, and Utah was without some of its best defensive players. So how concerning is this for Florida as we get ready to go? Still a week away, but get ready to jump into that SEC schedule. If you have trouble blocking against Utah, you're going to face some similar defensive lines in the Southeastern Conference. So how concerning is that to the Gator Nation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks, and with good reason. Obviously, the quarterback is the most important position, but a lot of folks kind of centered on, what does Florida have with Graham Mertz? And I certainly was as curious as anybody. Was he going to look any different? How was he going to be? Utilizing an offense that, frankly, when Napier has had his most success, he's allowed his quarterback, to kind of be very involved in the run game. And yet, what I've written about it throughout the offseason, and I at least pointed it out, Florida a year ago, despite Anthony Richardson's, kind of up and downs and highs and lows, the offensive line was kind of the backbone of that unit. And it paved the way for those two running backs. And obviously, Torrance becomes a second round pick, and you have some other guys who are now in the NFL. You lose a guy, two guys, only one end up staying, but two guys to USC there. So it's a brand new unit. I know they really like those two coaches, the tandem that Florida has there on the offensive line staff, but they did not look like a cohesive group at all in week one. And maybe it's just one poor performance. You get your center back, you suddenly have better chemistry, a little more cohesiveness there. But they got to get their ducks in a row quickly, because Tennessee, while they're not probably on Utah's level overall defensively, their front four, front seven looked very sharp in week one against Virginia. They created all sorts of havoc. I think they had 5 or 6 sacks. Pierce off the edge, former blue chipper, a really good player. And so Florida's going to be tested again right away. Now they will be at home. The crowd noise is going to be behind them. That'll help the offensive line. But between the penalties and just the poor play, fairly disconcerting coming out of week one for a group that I think the staff at least believed was not going to be one of their larger concerns this season.
Yeah, a couple more questions here with On3 national college football columnist Jesse Simonton. Jesse, I'm having a hard time getting that word columnist out. I just did it again. I can't say that word. But before we jump back into the questions here, we just have a couple more. I just want everybody, if you enjoy this, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. And we appreciate everybody's input and giving us the time of day. Thanks for stopping by and watching us. Now, Jesse, we hear so much about culture, the culture that Billy Napier is trying to build in Gainesville. Now, we can sort of quantify in college football, when you have bad culture, it seeps into your program and you start losing games. We know that. We know that bad cultures can cause losses. But can a good culture elevate you? Can you get more wins out of it? Or does it really come down to just talent? I mean, you tell me, is that something is it quantifiable? Because we've heard all off season about the culture being built in Gainesville and how significant it is. And everybody's together and there's such a great cohesion. But when you get out there and play on Saturday, I mean, that's a great thing to have. You'd rather have it than not have it. But is it really a big thing when it comes to winning and losing games? If that makes sense.
The longer I've done this, Keith, the less and less that I have leaned at all into kind of the culture narrative. And because of exactly how you just framed it, I thought, you maybe couldn't have said columnist, but I thought you framed that quite well, which is it quantifiable? And I just don't think it's hard for us on the outside to really explain or know what's real and what's good or what's bad. Northwestern being a prime example, for as much as they would yell to the hills about their culture, and you realize what's going on behind the scenes. I believe Florida's locker room believes in Billy Napier, and I would say that's based on their actions. They did not play particularly well at all against Utah, but they didn't quit. This was a team that showed fight for 4 quarters. So a poor performance doesn't indicate that there's maybe a sour locker room or anything like that. So I would say whatever cultural change that Napier is undergoing at Florida, TBD. I can't see that. What I can see, what we can see, is the product on the field. And I would agree, the talent is not, again, equitable to some of Florida's chief rivals. In week one, the coaching staff, I think, let down a group of players that, again, you have to elevate that group. If you don't have quite the talent, even if Utah is down 7-8 starters, on a roster by roster basis, maybe, Florida's going to have more blue chippers, but a lot of youth there, a lot of inexperience, some newness, as we mentioned, offensive line, defense, a lot of new starters. And so I thought the coaching staff ultimately let them down. So is that a cultural thing, or is that just, you had a bad week one, you rally around it? You're going to take care of McNeese State. The big game that's circled now is Tennessee in 2 weeks. You can't, with the way this season started, with how last season unfolded, you can't end a 20-year losing streak to a Vol team that I think has some question marks as well.
It's just the Gator Nation is just kind of hurt right now. This is 4 straight losses dating back to last season. They're watching the TV last night. Florida State's blowing out LSU, and your other rival, probably your biggest rival, Georgia, your biggest historic rivals, won 2 straight national championships. You don't know what's going on in Miami, but there's probably some concern there. And you're wondering where your program is. So let's try to end on a positive note if we can, Jesse. What is something out there that should give Florida fans some hope here? Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, right? So what is something that can get them to think that, better days are ahead?
Well, that's why I think that Tennessee game is so important. You can change a narrative on your coach, on your season, on an individual player, with one good 60 minutes, quarters of football. Now, how long will it last? We'll see. But if Graham Mertz can come out and have a nice game against Tennessee, if Billy Napier can beat the Vols now see them. That's another rival that Tennessee fans have angst about, because suddenly the Vols are on the ascent. If they can kind of push them back and say, hold up, Florida's still here. This is still the swamp. You still can't just come in here and think that Bazooka Joe and your offensive fireworks are going to work everywhere. If Florida can win that game, I do think there would be some momentum that would start to really build, and to let people say again, this is the proof of concept. There's going to be some bumps in the road, but we know DJ Lagway is going to be scoring 7-8 touchdowns every Friday night. We know what's coming down the pipe. So be patient, which again, I understand Florida fans pushing back on. That is a very natural reaction, because they've been told to be patient too many times, and you see what's happening elsewhere. But that's why Billy needs to have a marquee win or two. And so I think that time is money, and Billy Napier loves to throw out his various ex-rap quotes, and so that it's time to go get that bag versus Tennessee, win a big game that's going to be a marquee game in the SEC that weekend, and then see what happens if it kind of can become a catalyst for the rest of the 2023 season.
All right, great stuff, Jesse Simonton. Let's see if I can get this word. I can't get that word right. Columnist on 3, National College Football Columnist, Jesse Simonton. There, I finally got it right. Jesse, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me.